Thomas Scrimgeour from the Maxim Institute joins me now. Thomas, kia ora, thanks so much for your time today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Andrew.
Is it our fault in some ways, Thomas, because you get the parliament that you deserve? We voted for them. I mean, this is all very mathematical and theoretical, but we voted for them. Maybe they are a reflection of the society that they represent, or is that too theoretical in some ways?
Oh, I think you're onto something there. Certainly, we all have to do some introspection when we engage with politics. What do we look for in terms of the standards of conduct from our politicians? But I think it's probably not enough to say, oh, well, it's inevitable. This is the kind of society we're in, and politicians will just behave badly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that in recent years, the public standards of conduct from our politicians has slipped a bit. There is a decreasing sense of, I guess, civility or decorum from politicians. But it's important not to get nostalgic about such things. When you think back to previous generations of politicians, they weren't all upright citizens who were always doing the best sorts of things.
Yeah.
You know, before I was born, we had a prime minister who declared a snap election, and he was perhaps not fully in his own frame of mind publicly. Politicians have often been bullies or deceptive. There are all sorts of character failures in our politicians. So it's a question of what public standards of conduct get a working parliament despite all the human frailty and cultural challenges.
In some ways, though, is it a flaw within the structure? The Westminster system is naturally by design combative. You have opponents on each side. It is a little bit like a slightly more intellectual form of cage fighting, and that type of combative structure is the structure part of the problem in some ways.
Well, I think there's room to question parts of the structure, but I think the combativeness itself is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Parliaments and governments exercise profound power that shapes the lives of all of us. We all, as individual citizens, cannot resist the power of the government. So that combativeness, that testing of ideas, is really important. But because politicians who have very different visions for the future of our country have to work together so that Parliament can run, so that they can have those arguments, there needs to be strong standards of conduct for how those arguments are undertaken. Not just rules in Parliament, but actually an ethos, a way of life among politicians, that they respect the rules and see them as important and valuable.
Of course, the big stick that has been in the headlines recently is the Parliamentary Privileges Committee, that MPs can be kicked out by the Speaker, they can be sanctioned, they can be put on probation, they can lose their salary, but in some ways this seems to be not an effective deterrent because the behaviour is not improving.
Well, yeah, I mean, the punishments that Parliament has available to it are worthwhile thinking about and wrestling with. I mean, with reference to the Te Pāti Māori MPs who protested with the haka, Parliament is still to debate and settle on what the sanction will be.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge there is at the moment is that the government parties, National, ACT and New Zealand First, have a different idea of what the scale of punishment should be than Labour and the Greens, even though those parties agree that some sort of punishment should be agreed upon. And so there's going to be this debate about what will really be settled on. And there's a real risk if that decision doesn't reach a consensus among parliamentarians, that it'll create a hostility where there's retribution.
Yeah.
In future. And so it is really a concerning turning point that we will have to wait and see how it turns out.
In terms of improving the behaviour of the politicians in the first place, I suppose, fence at the top of the cliff, if you like, how can we incentivise our politicians to behave better? You've got some specific ideas. This is a paper that you've written for Maxim. What ideas are you putting on the table, Thomas?
Well, the first idea I'm putting on the table is not mine. So all credit to the columnist Liam Hare, New Zealand political commentator, who makes the argument that we should turn off the cameras in Parliament. Basically, his reasoning for doing so is that politicians now in the House are no longer debating with one another.
Yep.
They're trying to create conflict for clips that they can cut up, put in ads, and go viral. I think, there's room to criticize the Speaker of the House as well. The rules that currently exist should be enforced quickly and quite to the letter of the law.
Yep.
The current Parliament hasn't really earned a long leash for freedom to kind of bend the rules. But really what I settled on in thinking about and writing this column, I was reminded of a book by G.K. Chesterton called The Man Who Was Thursday. And it's a novel about a detective who goes down a rabbit hole into a world of absurdities and strangeness. And he reflects that, well, either I've gone mad or I must be drunk. But I trust I can behave like a gentleman in either condition. What we need is the analogy to politics should be clear.
Yeah.
Politics is a world of madness, but we need the willingness of parliamentarians to unilaterally disarm, to give up incivility regardless of how other parties or other people do it.
Yeah.
There needs to be a recognition that conducting oneself politely in Parliament is a character trait. It reflects on who we are and says something about ourselves. And so I think it really does just sit in the politician's own responsibility.
The turning the cameras off idea, just wanting to circle back for a moment. I'm not sure that it is peak viewing for a lot of people, with the possible exception of political tragics like you and I, and a few other exceptions, journalists, etc. Do you think that would have a large impact on behaviour? What's the point of having a haka if no one's watching in some ways?
Yeah, well, I think not many people watch Parliament TV in its organic form, live streamed and all of that, but it certainly provides a lot of footage for political parties, particularly creating ads in the form of Reels, TikToks, Instagram, all of that. And so I think so, but also not just, people have focused on the haka because it was quite a viral moment. It was very influential, but even in the kinds of debates and arguments politicians put forward. Historically, Parliament was a place where you attempted to convince other people who were in the room with you. It was a place of real debate where minds could be changed. It didn't always happen. It wasn't always perfect. Because of a range of incentives other than the video clips, Parliament tends not to have many minds changed at the moment, but it is still a theatre of debate. But when you do it for an audience outside the room, you no longer look at your opponent across there and try to meet them. There's no meeting of the minds. It's just a content production factory.
And if you're wanting to check out the witty repartee, then you're on Hansard rather than on TikTok, which is
absolutely.
Is a
you
little
can
bit
still find transparency in other ways.
Exactly.
Written forms, maybe even audio. It's harder to create good viral marketing with just audio clips. The video really kind of draws the viewer's attention. But yeah, if we keep Hansard records publicly available, there is transparency in a political process without necessarily as much of the theatre.
Is it possible, though, do you think, to go back to G.K. Chesterton's idea that, this was a book written in a different age. Can we behave like ladies and gentlemen in the current sort of moral environment, do you think, or has that age passed?
I think we have to believe that age hasn't passed. We have to commit to the idea that we can increase the levels of respectfulness. I would like to take half a step back to an older way of doing things where there used to be quite rigid standards of referring to other political figures by their surnames, by the honorifics, the Right Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Member. And that was always quite... it was always quite silly at one level. It's quite formal, but that formality provides a structure within which really fierce debates can be held. And so I think insisting on some of those slightly old-fashioned ways of referring to one another in Parliament might actually go some way to restoring levels of respect.
In terms of the structures around, question time is probably the central of the three-ring circus in Parliament. Really, this is where either the party sets up patsy questions for its own members or it's an opportunity to attack. This is where a lot of the TikTok is happening, I imagine.
It is, and many people do find a level of frustration with question time because it seems designed to generate such clips. The partial pushback I'd give to people who are a bit down on the idea of question time and the silly theatre of it all is it does mean that our government doesn't have a place to hide.
Yeah.
When we think about America's recent experience of both their current and their most recent former president, who are people who never have to face up to scrutiny of something similar to Parliament.
Yeah.
And so the recent journalism and reporting that's been coming about Joe Biden's age, and that's not the first time in America. Ronald Reagan, in the later parts of his presidential career, could be hidden away from the people. They could stage manage his appearances. Question time doesn't allow our prime minister or senior ministers to be stage managed in quite the same way. And so we get to see something of how they are thinking through problems. Even though often it devolves into kind of point scoring, it does serve a purpose.
Would we just be moving the TikToks out of the green seats and onto the tiles? Would this just be more, I suppose, the stand-up photo opportunities? Where would we have this sort of content creation rather than in Parliament? And hey, is that a step in the right direction in your view?
Yeah, so I think it would move some of these features just outside the House. It's probably inevitable that short form, viral video is the medium of the moment, and politicians will play that game as well as anyone. But I think safeguarding the House as a place where laws are passed and the government is subject to scrutiny of Parliament is crucial. And so politicians will play the games outside on the campaign trail, and that's inevitable. We can't make everything perfect. We're trying to restore the kind of conduct in the House where the real work is done is, I think, really important.
This is such an important and topical issue. Thomas, thank you for the work that you've done on this. I understand there's an article in the works likely to be on the Maxim website later this week. Is that correct?
That's correct, Andrew. So thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.